The first attack, using a computer virus called Stuxnet, was launched several years ago against an Iranian nuclear facility, almost certainly with some U.S. involvement. But the implications and the possible consequences are only now coming to light.
I do believe that the cyber threat will equal or surpass the threat from counterterrorism in the foreseeable future.
There's a strong likelihood that the next Pearl Harbor that we confront could very well be a cyber attack.
We will suffer a catastrophic cyber attack. The clock is ticking.
And there's reason for concern. For more than a decade, the U.S. military establishment has treated cyberspace as a domain of conflict, where it would need the capability to fend off attack or launch its own. That time is here because someone sabotaged a top-secret nuclear installation in Iran with nothing more than a long string of computer code.
We have entered into a new phase of conflict in which we use a cyber weapon to create physical destruction. And in this case, physical destruction in someone else's critical infrastructure.
Few people know more about the dark military art of cyber war than retired General Michael Hayden. He's a former head of the National Security Agency and was CIA director under George W. Bush. He knows a lot more about the attack on Iran than he can say here.
This was a good idea, all right? But I also admit this was a really big idea, too. The rest of the world is looking at this and saying, clearly someone has legitimated this kind of activity as acceptable international conduct. The whole world is watching.
Do you think this was a blown operation?
No, not at all. I think it's an incredibly sophisticated operation.
But General Hayden did acknowledge that there are all sorts of potential problems and possible consequences that come with this new form of warfare.
When you use a physical weapon, it destroys itself, in addition to the target if it's used properly. Cyber weapon doesn't. So there are those out there who can take a look at this, study it, and maybe even attempt to turn it to their own purposes.
Such as launching a cyber attack against critical infrastructure here in the United States. Until last fall, Sean McGurk was in charge of protecting it as head of cyber defense at the Department of Homeland Security. He believes that Stuxnet has given countries like Russia and China, not to mention terrorist groups and gangs of cyber criminals for hire, a textbook on how to attack key U.S. installations.
You can download the actual source code of Stuxnet now, and you can repurpose it and repackage it and then, point it back towards wherever it came from.
Sounds a little bit like Pandora's box.
Yes.
Whoever launched this attack,
they opened up the box, they demonstrated the capability, they showed the ability and the desire to do so, and it's not something that can be put back.
if somebody in the government had come to you and said, look, we're thinking about doing this, what do you think? What would you have told them?
I would have strongly cautioned them against it because of the unintended consequences of releasing such a code.
Meaning that other people could use it against you?
Yes.
Or use their own version of the code?
Something similar. Son of Stuxnet, if you will.
As a result, what was once abstract theory has now become a distinct possibility. If you can do this to a uranium enrichment plant, why couldn't you do it to a nuclear power reactor in the United States or an electric company?
You could do that to those facilities. It's not easy. It's a difficult task, and that's why Stuxnet was so sophisticated, but it could be done.
You don't need many billions, you just need a couple of millions. And this would buy you a decent cyber attack, for example, against the US power grid.
If you were a terrorist group or a failed nation state and you had a couple of $1 million, where would you go to find the people that knew how to do this?
On the internet.
They're out there?
Sure.
Most of the nation's critical infrastructure is privately owned and extremely vulnerable to a highly sophisticated cyber weapon like